The server room was a tomb of cold light and colder air. Margaret Wood stood at the central terminal at 2 a.m, the only sound the industrial hum of cooling fans. The sterile air tasted of ozone and dust. She was a ghost in the machine, a high-status contractor Obsidian Corp hired when their own security teams failed. Her specialty was finding ghosts, financial anomalies that bled millions through digital seams no one else could see. She preferred machines. Code didn't lie. Code didn't have secrets it couldn't eventually be forced to reveal. The encrypted drive on the desk was supposed to contain stolen financial ledgers, a simple recovery job. Her fingers flew across the mechanical keyboard, the rhythmic clacks echoing in the vast, empty space. The final encryption layer fell away. Her screen populated with files, not ledgers, dossiers, high-resolution surveillance photos, biometric data, daily routines mapped in minute detail, psychological profiles. The subjects were executives, politicians, journalists. Each file was a life dissected and cataloged with chilling precision. Corporate espionage, but personal, intimate. Her professional curiosity narrowed to a cold, sharp point. She opened the last file in the directory, labeled with a string of numbers her brain automatically parsed as a date from 3 years prior. The first image loaded. It was a photograph of her, taken from across a street cafe. She recognized the coat. She'd thrown it out after that winter. The timestamp was from 6 months before Obsidian Corp had ever contacted her for a consultation. She wasn't hired. She was targeted. The hum of the servers seemed to deepen, becoming a physical pressure against her eardrums. Silas Blackwood. The name dominated tech headlines. Visionary, disruptor, a billionaire who built Obsidian from a garage project into a global monolith that didn't just compete with governments, it often outperformed them. The media painted him as a reclusive genius. The industry knew a different truth. They called him a predator. When Silas Blackwood wanted a company, he didn't buy it. He surrounded it, starved it, and swallowed it whole. There were no hostile takeovers, only inevitable absorptions. Margaret's gaze remained locked on the metadata of her own dossier. The timestamps formed a pattern, not random surveillance, a 3-year observation cycle, methodical, purposeful. It defied all corporate logic. No executive spent resources tracking a freelance cybersecurity analyst for that long without making contact. Unless the contact itself was the final phase. She became aware of the building around her, the heavy silence of the skyscraper after hours. It wasn't just quiet. The silence had weight. It felt manufactured, like the air pressure had been dialed down a notch. The shadows cast by the server racks seemed longer, stretching across the polished floor toward her workstation like grasping fingers. A primal signal, ancient and unwelcome, fired in her hindbrain. Fight or flight. Her breath hitched. Her palms, dry a moment ago, were now clammy against the keyboard. It was absurd. She was in a locked server room on the 47th floor of one of the most secure buildings in the city. She was safe. Her body refused to believe it. Every instinct screamed that the perimeter had already been breached. The predator wasn't coming. He was already here. He had been here the whole time, and she was only now realizing she'd been standing in his shadow. She forced her hands to move, copy the data, get it onto a secure, air-gapped drive. It was her only leverage. Her fingers trembled, betraying her. She took a slow, deliberate breath, the air cold enough to burn her lungs. The professional facade reasserted itself, but it was thin now, cracking. Beneath it, a deeper, more terrifying understanding was taking root. This wasn't about stolen files. This was a test. And she had just passed it by finding them. Her fingers flew, initiating the data transfer to a secure external drive. The progress bar crawled. Each percentage point felt like a lifetime. The mechanical keyboard clacks were the only rebellion in the oppressive silence. Then the environment changed. The constant, deafening hum of the server fans began to slow. Not a power dip, a deliberate winding down, like a great beast settling its breath. The temperature, already freezing, dropped further. The chill seeped through her blazer, needling her skin. A new scent cut through the sterile, recycled air. Ozone, sharp and electric, layered over the petrichor scent of cold rain on concrete. It was the smell of a storm breaking indoors. Her eyes snapped to the security monitor feed for the hallway. A grid of 4 views showed empty, dimly lit corridors. She watched, her breath held. The feed glitched. For 1 second, the images dissolved into static. When they resolved, nothing had changed. The corridors were still empty. But they were wrong. She leaned closer, her blood turning to ice. The timestamp in the corner of each feed was frozen. The second counter wasn't moving. The footage was looping. A perfect 3-second clip of an empty hallway playing on repeat. Someone had overridden the system with a sophistication that bypassed every alarm she'd coded herself. The heavy magnetic lock on the server room door disengaged. The sound was a hollow, metallic thud that vibrated through the floor. It wasn't the sound of a keycard swipe or a manual override from her terminal. It was the sound of a higher authority being asserted. The central system had been commanded to open, not hacked. The door remained closed, but it was unlocked. The transfer on her screen hit 47%. Too slow. But as she stared at the unmoving door, she understood a more fundamental truth. In this game, she had never been playing for leverage. She had been playing for his attention. And now she had it. Completely. The door slid open, not with a rush of air, but with a silent, hydraulic smoothness that felt more expensive than violence. He filled the doorway. Silas Blackwood. The photographs in the boardroom magazines failed to capture his scale. He was a mountain range in a bespoke charcoal suit. The fabric strained across his shoulders, not from poor tailoring, but from the sheer density of what lay beneath. A jagged silver scar ran from just under his jawline down into the starched white collar of his shirt, a brutal fault line in an otherwise polished landscape. He stepped inside, and the room seemed to shrink, the ceiling to lower. He didn't speak. His eyes, a stormfront gray, found her immediately. He closed the door. The magnetic lock re-engaged with a soft, final click. Then he began to move toward her. His steps were silent on the polished concrete, a predator's grace that belonged in a forest, not a server farm. He didn't hurry. He had all the time in the world, and his approach made her understand she had none. Margaret's back pressed against the cold edge of the terminal desk. Her mind scrambled for the script, for the professional bluff. She gestured to the screen, to the damning files. Her voice, when it came, was tighter than she wanted, but held its ground. The data is copied. It's set to broadcast to 3 separate secure servers if my biometrics don't check in every hour. It was a lie, but a good one. A standard failsafe. You touch me, and every intelligence agency and rival firm on this file gets a Christmas present. Silas stopped an arm's length away. He didn't even glance at the screen. He looked only at her. He absorbed her threat, processed it, and discarded it as irrelevant. The absolute dismissal was more terrifying than anger. He took the final step into her space, erasing the last of the distance. She had to crane her neck to meet his gaze. He loomed, his presence a physical weight that pressed the air from her lungs. He was heat and ozone and the faint, clean scent of expensive soap over something darker, muskier, wild. He leaned in, slowly, not to look at the screen, to bring his face close to the side of her head. She felt the warmth of his skin, heard the slow, deliberate draw of his breath as he inhaled the scent of her fear, her shampoo, her essence. The intimacy of it was a violation that bypassed logic and went straight to her spine. His voice, when it finally came, was a low rumble that vibrated in the floor and up through the soles of her feet. It wasn't loud. It was heavy. "Now," he murmured, the word brushing against her ear. "You know too much to ever leave." He reached past her, not for the keyboard, for the external drive, its transfer light still blinking. He plucked it from the port. His hand, large enough to palm a basketball, closed around the reinforced casing. There was a sound of crushing plastic and splintering circuit boards. A single, effortless flex of his fingers. He opened his hand. Metallic shards and silicone guts rained onto the desk with a pathetic clatter. He met her eyes again. The storm in his gaze had quieted into something worse. Absolute certainty. The transfer failed at 87%, he stated, his voice still that terrifying, calm baritone. "You are very good, but you are not finished. And you," he leaned in again, his final words a breath against her lips, "belong to me." The next morning, in the sterile sunlight of her own apartment, Margaret tried to resign. She opened her secure terminal, navigated to the Obsidian contractor portal, and clicked the termination clause. A red error banner flashed instantly. Credentials invalid. Access denied. She tried her personal banking app next. Login failed. A customer service number, automated, informed her all accounts linked to her social security number had been placed under a temporary security freeze by order of Obsidian Corp's legal department for her protection. Her smart home system greeted her with a cheerful chime. "Good morning, Margaret. All systems are now integrated with Obsidian Secure Life. Your lease has been assumed and paid in full for the next 36 months. Would you like me to adjust the ambient lighting?" She stood in the center of her living room, the familiar space feeling like a meticulously staged crime scene. She wasn't fired. She was absorbed. Her digital footprint, her life, had been quietly, surgically excised from the world and transplanted into his ecosystem. Her professional self had been revoked and replaced with something else, a higher clearance, a permanent status. She dressed in a sharp defensive blazer and went to the office to quit in person. The Obsidian Tower lobby recognized her, the turnstiles clicking open with a new proprietary authority. The elevator shot to the executive floor without her pressing a button. The doors opened not onto the open-plan bullpen, but directly into a private annex. A man in a sleek tactical suit, not corporate security, stood waiting. Marcus, Silas's second. He looked at her with a confusing mix of deference and profound pity. "He's expecting you, Miss Wood. This way." He led her not to the server level, but up a final, private elevator to the penthouse. The doors opened onto Silas Blackwood's office. It wasn't a workspace. It was a command center with a view of the entire city, his territory laid out in a glittering grid. Silas stood at the window, his back to her. He spoke without turning. "Your discovery last night was the final interview for a position that does not exist on any org chart." He finally turned. The morning light carved the planes of his face, highlighting the scar. "The role is consultant. You report directly to me. You interface with no one else." She found her voice, cold with fury. "This is kidnapping, coercion. I have labor laws, rights." He walked to his desk, picking up a single sheet of paper. He held it out to her. It was a real-time feed of her bank balance, now showing a sum with more zeros than her student loans had ever possessed. Next to it, a digital copy of her assumed lease. "Your old life was a set of vulnerabilities. I have secured them. The law is a system, Margaret. I own the servers it runs on. He placed the page down. You can walk out that door. Your accounts will remain, your home will remain, but you will never work in cybersecurity again. Every system will see you as a threat I have marked. Or, he said, his voice dropping to that low, inevitable frequency, you can accept that your competence has drafted you into a war you didn't know existed. You can do the work you were born to do with the resources you deserve under my protection. He wasn't offering a job. He was offering a reality. The work, she managed. What is it? A ghost of something predatory touched his eyes. You hunted ghosts in financial data. Now you will hunt the things that haunt the spaces between networks, the threats that are personal, the ones that feel like they're hunting you. He walked to a side door and opened it, revealing not another office, but a pristine, glass-walled suite adjacent to his own. A terminal more advanced than any she'd used sat waiting, her new desk. Your choice is an illusion, Margaret. You chose the moment you cracked that encryption. Now come in. The first threat is already inside the firewall. Her new workspace was a fortress within a fortress. 3 walls of bulletproof glass looked out onto the executive floor, but the glass was one way. She could see the blurred shapes of employees moving like fish in an aquarium. They could not see in. The 4th wall was solid titanium, with a single seamless door that connected directly to Silas's office. It had no handle on her side. The work was real. It was also a lie. She was tasked with hunting incursions that bypassed standard corporate firewalls. The signatures were strange. They didn't seek data. They sought presence. They mapped behavior, tracked biometric residuals left on keyboards, listened for stress patterns in voice logs. They were hunting people, not secrets. The threats felt less like corporate espionage and more like a rival pack marking territory. Silas's presence was the cage's true architecture. He was always nearby. She never heard him enter his office, but she would feel the change. The air would grow heavier, carrying his scent, that sharp bite of ozone. The low-frequency vibration of his voice, even in a calm conversation on the phone, would travel through the shared wall and hum in her bones. His gaze was a physical weight. She would be tracing a code thread, and the fine hairs on the back of her neck would rise. She'd look up. Through the glass partition, he'd be watching her work, his storm gray eyes fixed not on her screen, but on her. He didn't watch with gratitude or professional interest. He watched with a hungry, possessive intensity that made her skin feel too tight. One afternoon, she found it. A vulnerability so deep it was woven into the city's power grid management system. A backdoor that could let someone flip switches for an entire sector. It wasn't just code. It was a loaded gun pointed at 1 million homes. Her fingers flew, crafting a patch, weaving a counter-intrusion so elegant it felt like composing music. She was unaware of time, of the setting sun, of anything but the logic flowing from her mind to the machine. She deployed the fix. The system sealed, stronger than before. Silence. She looked up, exhaling a breath she hadn't realized she'd held. He was there, leaning against the doorframe of the connecting door, which stood open. He'd been watching the entire time. His arms were crossed over his chest, his expression unreadable. He didn't praise her. He didn't thank her. He walked into her glass cage. He stopped behind her chair, his shadow enveloping her. One large hand came to rest on the back of her neck, not squeezing, just claiming. His thumb brushed the sensitive cord of her spine. Mine, he said. The single word, a low rumble of absolute possession. It wasn't a romantic declaration. It was a statement of fact, as if her genius were a natural resource he had just secured the rights to. Her competence didn't earn his respect. It completed his territory. The hand lifted. He turned and walked back into his office, leaving the door open. She sat frozen, the ghost of his touch burning on her skin. The victory of closing the vulnerability felt hollow, meaningless. The real transaction had just happened. He had taken her professional triumph and claimed it as an extension of his own power. She had saved a city block, and all he had seen was proof that his asset was performing to specification. The glass walls of her cage felt thinner. She wasn't just working for him. She was being curated. Her skill was the prize, and he was the collector who had finally secured it. The work was the bait that kept her in the trap, and she had just taken it willingly, hungrily. She looked at her reflection in the dark glass. A woman in a sharp blazer, surrounded by the most advanced technology on the planet, utterly alone. The professional triumph felt hollow, claimed as an extension of his power. She had saved a city block, and he had only seen proof that his asset performed to specification. The alert was a silent, crimson bloom across her primary monitor. Not a standard intrusion, a declaration of war. A rival firm, Kraken Strategic, a front for a competitor pack, Marcus had tersely explained, launched a brute force assault on Obsidian's core infrastructure. It wasn't stealthy. It was a digital tsunami, designed to overwhelm, shatter, and expose. Margaret's world narrowed to the flow of code on her screens. Her fingers became a blur, her mind a cold, clear weapon. She erected temporary firewalls, routed attacks into dead-end servers, wrote counter-malware on the fly. The pace was frantic, brutal. For the first time since her reassignment, her fear was irrelevant. There was only the problem and her genius to solve it. Silas did not sit at his desk. He stood behind her chair, a silent sentinel. He wasn't watching the code. He was watching the door, the glass walls, the air vents. He spoke into a secure comms unit, his voice a low, military cadence, coordinating physical security teams. She heard the violence he held back in every clipped syllable. "Hold the stairwell. Lethal force authorized." He was a general, and the building was his battlefield. His presence was no longer a possessive weight. It was a wall. As long as he stood there, nothing physical could touch her. It allowed her mind to fly. Hours bled together. The adrenaline was a potent mask, but her body began to betray her. She hadn't moved, hadn't eaten. A fine, debilitating tremor started in her hands, a combination of hypoglycemia and neural overload. The code began to swim before her eyes. She didn't notice, but he did. His hand came down on the back of her neck. It wasn't the claiming touch from before. This was grounding, firm, unyielding, a tether to reality. The shock of contact was immediate. A visible arc of blue static snapped between his skin and hers with a sharp crackle, illuminating the dim room for a split second. The jolt shot through her, not painful, but electrifying. It severed her trance, pulling her back into her body. "Breathe," his voice commanded, a rumble against her spine. "The attack is fracturing. You have broken its spine. Now finish it." The tremor in her hands stilled. The code resolved into clarity. He had taken her exhaustion and, with a touch, converted it back into focus. He didn't remove his hand. He left it there, a warm, heavy anchor, as she typed the final sequence of commands. The crimson alerts on her screen winked out, one by one, replaced by the steady green glow of secure systems. The silence that followed was different. It was stunned, heavy with the echo of repelled violence. The external threat was gone, but his hand remained on her neck. The static hum between them had settled into a steady, palpable current. In that silent, charged aftermath, she understood the new dynamic. He was the shield. She was the sword. And the connection between them, that inexplicable electric charge, was the bond that made the weapon system complete. Her surrender wasn't to a man. It was to the brutal efficiency of a partnership where her mind was the most valued asset he protected. The glass cage had a purpose, and for the first time, shivering under the heat of his hand, she felt its terrible, necessary strength. The heavy silence in the glass suite was a living thing. Margaret stared at her hands, resting on the now dark keyboard. The fine tremors were back, worse now that the adrenaline had drained away, leaving a hollow, shaking cold. Her blood sugar had cratered. She felt disembodied, lightheaded. He noticed before she did. His hand left her neck. She heard the low rustle of his suit jacket being removed. When he spoke, his voice had shed its military precision. It was rougher, edged with a different kind of command. "You're crashing." It wasn't a question. He picked up his desk phone, dialed a single digit. The usual. To my office. Now. He hung up. 20 minutes later, a silent attendant wheeled in a cart. The scents hit her first. Seared meat, rich herbs, roasted garlic. The cart was laden not with canapes, but with sustenance. Thick cuts of rare steak, their centers a bloody crimson. A mountain of roasted root vegetables glistening with fat. A dense, dark bread. A bottle of red wine so deep it was nearly black. He dismissed the attendant with a flick of his wrist. The door sealed them in again. Eat, he said, his voice leaving no room for debate. She stared at the feast. This is excessive. It is necessary. Your body has burned through its reserves. You need protein, iron. He pulled a chair out for her. The gesture was archaic, predatory. Sit. Her stomach clenched, not with hunger but with a dizzying nausea. She shook her head. I can't. He moved then, not with his usual controlled grace, but with a sudden, agitated speed. He ripped off his tie, tossing it onto the couch. The top button of his shirt was already open. You will, the words were gritted out. If you don't, it goes to waste. I hate waste. It was a transparent lie, but her body betrayed her. A loud, painful gurgle echoed in the quiet room. She flushed. He didn't smile. His eyes darkened, his gaze dropping to her mouth as if the sound pleased him on a primal level. Defeated, she sat. He served her, piling her plate with steak and vegetables. He didn't sit across from her. He leaned against his desk, arms crossed, watching. He wasn't eating. He was observing a critical systems operation. She took a small, reluctant bite. The flavor was overwhelming, rich and vital. An involuntary sound, a faint hum of pleasure, escaped her. Across the room, Roman went perfectly still. His breathing halted. He watched her chew, his pupils dilating until the storm gray was swallowed by black. His hands gripped the edge of his desk, the wood groaning in protest. She felt like a specimen under a microscope. Aren't you going to eat? I'm fine, he rasped. He looked like he was in pain. He grabbed a piece of steak from the platter with his bare fingers, a shockingly feral gesture, and shoved it into his mouth, swallowing it almost whole. You eat like you're starving, he muttered, his voice thick. I was working. You eat like it's the first time. He pushed away from the desk, pacing a short, tight line. You consume. You don't just fuel. It's alive. The intimacy of the observation was more unsettling than his staring. He wasn't commenting on her manners. He was analyzing her vitality, her will to survive, and he was hungry for it. He stopped pacing and came to stand beside her chair. He didn't touch her. He reached for her wine glass, took a sip, then did something that stopped her heart. He brought the glass to her lips, his eyes locked on hers. A drop of wine clung to her lower lip. Before she could react, his thumb swept across her mouth, wiping it away. The callous pad of his thumb was rough against her skin. The sensation was a lightning strike of pure, undiluted awareness. Time suspended. The glass cage, the city lights, the digital war, all of it vanished. There was only the heat of his thumb, the intensity of his gaze, and the shocking vulnerability in his next words. Spoken so softly, she felt them more than heard them. Your competence is the only thing that quiets the noise in my head, he confessed, the admission torn from him. When you work, the world finally makes sense. The truce of the shared meal shattered with the first crack of thunder. It wasn't a distant rumble. It was a percussive blast that struck the side of the building, vibrating through the titanium frame. The city lights beyond the glass walls vanished, blotted out by a solid wall of bruised purple cloud. Lightning forked, illuminating the office in stark, blinding white. The automated building protocols triggered instantly. Titanium storm shutters began their descent over the floor-to-ceiling windows with a low, hydraulic whine, sealing them in a plush, sound-dampened tomb. Margaret froze, a fork halfway to her mouth. The color drained from her face. She had a phobia, not of storms, but of being trapped during them. A childhood memory, buried deep. A basement, a failed lock, the sound of a tornado siren muffled by concrete. Her logical mind knew they were safe. The building was a fortress. Her body knew only primal terror. Her breath hitched, becoming shallow, rapid. She set the fork down with a clatter, her hands gripping the edge of the table to hide their shaking. Silas's head snapped toward her. He wasn't looking at the storm. He was looking at her. His nostrils flared, a subtle, animalistic gesture. He could smell it. The sharp spike of cortisol, the acrid scent of panic flooding her system. Another thunderclap, louder. She flinched violently, a small, choked sound escaping her. He moved. In 2 strides, he was at the window, his back to the storm. He positioned himself directly between her and the view of the lightning, a massive, immovable barrier. He didn't touch her. He didn't offer hollow reassurance. He simply blocked the threat, turning the full force of his attention onto her. "It's just pressure differentials," he stated, his voice a low, steady counter-rhythm to the chaos outside. "Sonic vibrations against reinforced polymer and steel. It cannot reach you." Her logic screamed he was right. Her nervous system was in revolt. Her heart hammered against her ribs, a frantic bird. She couldn't get a full breath. The walls of the office, despite their luxury, seemed to contract. Silas watched her struggle for a long moment, his gray eyes calculating. Then he did something impossible. A sound began in his chest. Not a word. A deep, subvocal rumble, so low it was more vibration than noise. It was the purr of a massive predator, a frequency that bypassed her ears and resonated directly in her sternum. The rhythmic pulse of it was antithetical to the erratic thunder. It was order. It was stability. Against all reason, it worked. Her frantic heartbeat began to slow, sinking to the steady rhythm of his rumble. The tight band around her chest loosened. She drew in a shuddering, deep breath. The panic receded, not gone, but pushed back behind this new, anchoring sound. He saw the change. The rumble ceased. The silence he left was different. Quiet. Safe. "Nothing in this world can breach these walls while I am inside them," he said, his voice barely above a whisper, yet it carried absolute authority. He wasn't boasting. He was stating a fundamental law of physics. The storm is outside. I am not. Therefore, you are safe. He didn't move from his post. He remained her shield, his gaze holding hers. In that moment, he wasn't her captor or her CEO. He was the only solid point in a universe of chaos. The monster had become her sanctuary. And the terrifying part was the profound, instinctive relief that flooded her as she accepted it. The fight drained from her shoulders. She was still afraid, but she was no longer alone with her fear. He had taken it into himself, standing between her and the abyss, and his presence was the only wall that mattered. The storm passed, but the threat had evolved. The digital assault on the building had been a feint. Marcus's voice crackled over the comms unit, tight with urgency. "Lobby breach, physical team, they're in the elevator shaft." Silas didn't hesitate. He grabbed her arm, his grip unbreakable but not bruising. "The building is compromised. We're leaving." He didn't take the elevators. He led her through a hidden panel in his office wall, down a stark concrete stairwell that smelled of damp and disinfectant. It exited into a subterranean garage where an armored Land Rover Defender sat idling, its matte black paint absorbing the weak fluorescent light. He bundled her into the passenger seat, buckled her belt himself, and slammed the door. The drive was an education in controlled violence. He navigated the rain-slicked city streets not like a CEO, but like a combat pilot. The massive vehicle responded to his slightest touch, weaving through traffic with a predatory grace that defied its bulk. He took corners at speeds that pressed her against the door, his eyes constantly scanning mirrors, side streets, rooftops. He wasn't driving to a location. He was executing an extraction. Once they hit the highway north, the true nature of his reflexes revealed itself. A truck ahead of them hit a deep pool of water, sending a wall of spray across both lanes. Silas didn't brake. His arm moved in a blur. The wheel spun, the SUV hydroplaned sideways in a perfectly controlled drift, slicing through the curtain of water and straightening out before her brain could process the loss of traction. It was the same impossible speed from the server room, scaled to a 2-ton vehicle. The G-force pressed her against the door, her stomach lurching as the tires bit back into the asphalt. The cabin went silent, the rush of water against glass the only sound before the engine roared back to life. She watched his hands, the absolute certainty in his posture. Terror and awe warred within her. This was the monster unchained, and he was using every ounce of that monstrous capability to protect her. 2 hours later, they turned onto a private road swallowed by dense pine forest. The Greystone estate was less a mansion and more a fortified lodge of stone and timber, built into the side of a mountain overlooking a frozen lake. It was isolated, silent, and breathed an air of ancient, rugged permanence. He parked in a covered stone porte-cochere. Inside, the air was bitingly cold. Silas went to a digital panel, his expression darkening. Storm took down the main grid. Backup generator powers security and refrigeration. He glanced at her, already shivering in her thin blazer. The heating in the guest wing is electric. It won't work. He led her through a great room dominated by a massive stone hearth, cold and dark. The only reliable heat is in here, he said, gesturing to the main fireplace, and in the master suite. There's a wood stove. The implication hung in the frigid air. Forced proximity. I'll take the couch, she said, her voice small. No. The refusal was instant, absolute. The temperature will drop to -10 tonight. The couch offers no insulation. You'll freeze. He ran a hand through his hair, the gesture uncharacteristically agitated. You will take the master suite. It has thermal bedding. I will stay here. She looked at the bare stone floor, the unlit fireplace. You can't sleep on the floor. I have a high tolerance for cold, he muttered, not meeting her eyes. Take the cat. He'd brought Mr. Biscuits? The thought was so absurd it broke through her fear. He had, in his frantic extraction, thought to secure her cat. The carrier was by the door, emitting a low, offended yowl. Go, he said, his voice tight. I'll bring wood. An hour later, ensconced in the master suite, a room of raw timber and animal pelts dominated by a bed large enough for 5, she cracked the door. In the great room, Silas lay on a bearskin rug before a newly roaring fire. He had discarded his shirt. The firelight danced over the landscape of his back, a topography of dense muscle and old silvery scars. He wasn't shivering. He looked like he was burning from within, heat radiating off him in waves. As if sensing her gaze, he tensed. He didn't turn. Go to sleep, Margaret, he commanded, his voice strained. Lock the door. Why? A tremor ran through his powerful frame. Because, he whispered into the fur, I sleepwalk. She closed the door. She turned the heavy iron lock. The sound was final. But as she curled under the mountain of furs, listening to the wind howl outside, the image that lingered wasn't of a trapped beast. It was of a king, sleeping like a loyal hound at the gate of her cell, guarding her from a world he himself had made too dangerous for her to survive alone. The cage had moved, but its essential nature, her safety purchased by his terrifying presence, remained unchanged. Morning light, sharp and cold, streamed through the high windows of the great room. Margaret found him building up the fire, his movements stiff. A dark, rusty stain bloomed on the sleeve of his fresh gray t-shirt, just below the shoulder. You're bleeding. He didn't look up. It's a graze, irrelevant. From the extraction? She moved closer. The scent of copper and ozone was faint but distinct. You need to clean it. It will heal. Infection won't. The professional in her, the problem solver, overrode the fear. Sit, let me see. He finally turned, his eyes shadowed. A flicker of something vulnerable crossed his face. Not pain, but reluctance. He sat on the broad stone hearth with a heavy sigh, presenting his back to her. She fetched the first aid kit from the bathroom, her hands steady. When she returned, she knelt behind him. Take off the shirt. He obeyed, peeling the fabric over his head with a wince he tried to hide. The wound was a 4-inch furrow along the meat of his deltoid, deep enough to glisten. It wasn't a bullet graze. It was a claw mark. Her breath caught. He'd been injured in his other form, protecting the perimeter. She cleaned the area with antiseptic, her touch clinical. His skin was feverishly hot, the muscles beneath like granite. He didn't flinch from the sting. He flinched from the sensitivity of her touch. A low, involuntary sound escaped him when her fingers brushed the unbroken skin beside the cut. "Sorry," she murmured. "Don't be." His voice was a strained rasp. "Just hurry." She applied the antibiotic ointment. As she smoothed the gel, her fingertips registered the impossible density of his flesh, the sheer cellular vitality that radiated heat. It was like tending to a star contained in skin. His breathing changed. It grew ragged. She felt the shift before she saw it. The muscles under her hands began to tremble, not with weakness, but with a terrible, restrained power. A growl, pure and animal, ripped from his throat, shredding the last of his human composure. She froze. He twisted away from her, surging to his feet, putting the width of the hearth between them. He was panting, his chest heaving. His eyes, when they met hers, were a blazing molten gold. The wolf was right there, pressing against the surface, provoked not by threat, but by care. "I can't," he gasped, the words distorted. "Your touch, it's too much. The wolf, it surfaces, it wants." He didn't finish. He turned his back to her again, his hands braced against the mantelpiece, head bowed as he fought for control. In the heavy silence, with the scent of his blood and pain in the air, he spoke. The confession was raw, stripped bare. "I didn't steal those files to trap you, Margaret." His voice was broken glass. "I stole them to lure you, because I couldn't stay away any longer. I had to make you see. I had to make you come to me." He let out a shuddering breath. "The monster you're afraid of, it's the only part of me that knew how to love you." The admission hung in the air, more devastating than any growl. He hadn't manipulated her life out of malice, but out of a desperate, feral longing he could no longer suppress. The predator's grand strategy had a fatal human flaw: need. And in that moment, the architecture of her fear began to irrevocably crack. His confession hung in the air of the great room, a truth more disorienting than any lie. Margaret retreated to the master suite, the heavy door clicking shut behind her. The silence inside was a vacuum. Logic was her fortress. It had always been. Now it was under siege from the inside. He hadn't framed her or blackmailed her. He had orchestrated her. For 3 years he had watched, and then he had engineered the perfect scenario for her to discover him. He had manipulated the very fabric of her professional reality to suit the instincts of a creature he couldn't control. It wasn't evil. It was insane. And it made her furious. The fury was clean. It was a logical reaction to a profound violation of autonomy. She clung to it. She dressed quickly, her movements sharp with purpose. She would not be curated. She would not be a prize in a collection. She would leave. She found the keys to the Land Rover on a hook by the main door. Silas was outside, she assumed, patrolling the perimeter in his other form. It was her chance. She wouldn't take his vehicle. She'd walk to the main road, hitch a ride, disappear. Her old life was gone, but she could build a new one he hadn't pre-designed. The cold outside was a physical assault. The snow was knee-deep, pristine, and silent. She pushed through it, following the tire tracks of their arrival back toward the tree line and the gravel road beyond. The forest was a cathedral of white and green, utterly still. Her breath plumed in ragged gasps. The fury kept her warm for the first 100 yards. Then the woods began to watch her. She felt it first, a prickling at the nape of her neck. She stopped, turning slowly. At the edge of the pines, half shaded in the gloom, stood a massive black wolf. It was larger than any natural animal, its shoulders level with her chest. Its eyes were not the feral yellow of a wild predator, but the same molten, intelligent gold that had flashed in Silas's gaze moments ago. It didn't growl. It didn't advance. It simply stood, observing her flight. Panic, cold and sharp, lanced through her. She changed direction, angling away from it, stumbling through deeper snow toward what looked like a clearer path along a ridge. The wolf moved. It didn't chase. It paced parallel to her, a silent, dark escort. When she veered too close to the ridge's edge, where snow overhung a hidden drop, the wolf lunged forward, not at her. It placed its bulk directly in her path, blocking her, and nudged her firmly back with its head, away from the unstable brink. She fell backward into the snow, staring up at it. It stood over her, its breath warm and fogging in the air. It chuffed softly, a sound of clear admonishment. Then it stepped back, giving her space. The logical fallacy collapsed. The monster she was fleeing was the only thing preventing her fall. The predator stalking her steps was her protector. Her mind, trained to find the flaw in every system, found it here, her own premise. She had defined safety as escape from him. The evidence before her, the hidden ravine, the guiding nudge, proved safety was inextricable from his presence. He was the danger, and he was the shield. The equation didn't balance. It simply was. The wolf turned and began to walk slowly back toward the lodge. It paused, looked over its shoulder at her, and waited. Margaret lay in the snow, the cold seeping through her clothes, the fight draining out of her. She had tried to solve him like a code. He was not a problem to be solved. He was a force of nature to be weathered. And in the eye of that storm, for reasons she could not yet logic into existence, was the only calm she had ever truly known. She pushed herself up. She stood in the silent white clearing, the cold seeping through her clothes. The cage had a door. She had just proven she could open it. The revelation was not freedom. It was the realization that she no longer wanted to walk through it. The truce of the forest was shattered at dusk. Margaret stood at the great room window, watching the first pinpricks of light appear in the distant tree line. Not stars, flashlights. Dozens of them, moving in a coordinated sweep toward the lodge. Silas entered from the back porch, the scent of cold pine and wildness clinging to him. He changed back into human form, his expression grim. He carried a set of car keys, which he placed on the massive oak table with a definitive click. "They've found us," he said, his voice devoid of its usual rumble. It was flat, final. Kraken's enforcers. They will breach the perimeter in under 20 minutes. He walked to a concealed panel in the wall, pressed his palm to a scanner. A section of stone slid back, revealing a narrow passageway lit by weak emergency bulbs. That tunnel leads to a garage cut into the mountain. Inside is a car, untraceable, fully fueled. It will take you to a private airfield. From there, you can go anywhere. Your old identity, funds, a new life, it's all arranged. He turned to face her, his gray eyes holding hers. For the first time, she saw no possession in his gaze, only a bleak, devastating honesty. "This is the choice, Margaret. Take the keys. Go now. You will be safe. You will be alone." He took a step toward her, stopping just outside her personal space. "Or," he said, the word hanging in the charged air, "you stay. You fight. With me. Here." He gestured to the lights advancing through the trees. "If you stay, you are in danger. You will see violence. You may not survive it." He let the duality of the promise settle between them, the sterile safety of escape versus the bloody, terrifying belonging of standing her ground. "But if you stay," he whispered, the low frequency returning to his voice, a vibration she felt in her teeth. "You are home." Margaret looked from the keys on the table to the advancing lights. She thought of her old life, the sterile server rooms, the cold logic of code, the profound loneliness of being the smartest person in a room of ghosts. It had been safe. It had been a living death. This chaos outside the window, this was the first time her blood had sung with purpose. This terrifying man offering her a way out was the first person who had ever seen her, truly seen the weapon and the woman fused together, and had not looked away in fear. The choice was an illusion. He had said it himself. She had made it the moment she cracked his encryption. The moment she saw the wolf in the snow and understood its guidance. The moment his touch had grounded her amidst the digital storm. Her old life wasn't safety, it was data. This was life. Raw, dangerous, and irrevocably his. She walked to the table. She picked up the heavy iron key fob. She felt the weight of the escape it promised. Then she turned, and with a single, decisive motion, she threw the keys out the open back door. They vanished into the deep snow with a soft thump. She turned to the terminal she'd set up on the side table. She opened her laptop, her fingers finding the keys without looking. The screen glowed to life, reflecting her own face, pale, determined, alive. "Tell me what you need," she said, her voice clear and steady in the silent room. "The house has a smart security system. I can see the schematics. Let's turn it into a weapon." Silas stared at her for a long, breathless moment. Then the ghost of a smile, fierce and proud, touched his lips. He gave a single, sharp nod. "The perimeter sensors are here," he said, moving to stand behind her, his hand coming to rest on the back of her chair. Not claiming, anchoring. Blind them first. The estate became a weapon. Margaret's world narrowed to the architectural schematics on her screen and the feed from perimeter cameras. She didn't see men. She saw heat signatures, vectors, vulnerabilities. Her fingers flew, writing code that was less software and more symphonic sabotage. Blinding them first, she confirmed, her voice a calm monotone. She accessed the estate's exterior lighting grid, industrial-grade halogens meant to mimic daylight for security. She overrode the safeties and sent a surge. On the camera feeds, the advancing figures were swallowed by a blistering white nova. Shouts of pain and confusion crackled over the audio feed she'd hijacked. "Perimeter lights neutralized for 90 seconds, she reported. Good. Silas's voice was a ghost from the shadows by the door. He was a silhouette, checking the action of a sleek black firearm. "Now lock them out, every door, every window." She was already there. The smart locks on the ground floor service entrances snapped shut with heavy thuds. The automated storm shutters on the lower windows began their descent, sealing the lower level into a titanium shell. She routed the camera feeds to a secondary monitor for him. "You have eyes. Lower level is a drum. They'll breach the main doors. It's the only point of failure." "Let them," he said. The words were a low growl. "Make the drum dark." She killed the interior lights on the ground floor, plunging it into pitch blackness on the feeds. The only illumination came from the muzzle flashes of the invaders as they blew the locks on the main oak doors and poured into the great room they had just left. On the monitors, Silas moved. He was a phantom in the dark. He didn't use the gun. He used his hands, his body. The thermal cameras showed the chaos in cold blues and yellows. A heat signature would rush in, only to be intercepted by a larger, hotter blur. The signature would crumple, its heat blooming briefly before fading to cold blue. He was dismantling them with brutal, silent efficiency. She watched, detached, as the predator she feared turned his violence on the true threat. He was protecting the den, protecting her. The attackers adapted. They used thermal scopes. A shot rang out, splintering the banister near the stairs to the upper floor where she worked. Silas's form on the monitor flinched, a bloom of intense yellow-orange flaring at his shoulder. He'd been hit. Margaret's breath caught. Logic screamed to stay hidden. Something deeper, something wired into her by his confession in the snow, overrode it. She grabbed a secondary tablet, pulling up the internal climate controls. She couldn't fight, but she could manipulate the environment. She triggered the fire suppression system in the great room. Not the water, the inert gas. A loud hiss filled the audio feed as argon flooded the space, displacing oxygen. The thermal scopes would fog, their readings going wild. The invaders stumbled, disoriented. It gave Silas the opening. She saw his signature surge forward. Then the door to her loft workspace exploded inward. A man stood there, geared in tactical black, his weapon raised. Not at her, at the terminal. He was here to kill the system, to kill her advantage. Before she could move, Silas was there. He must have taken the stairs 3 at a time. He placed himself directly between the muzzle and her, his back to her. The man fired. Silas took the round in the chest with a grunt that was more anger than pain. Then he moved. It wasn't a human movement. It was a blur of controlled fury. His form seemed to swell, to blur at the edges. A snarl, too deep and complex for a human throat, ripped through the room. His hand, when it shot out, was not entirely a hand. Claws extended, glinting in the screen light. He swatted the weapon aside, then closed the distance. The violence that followed was swift, primal, and final. When it was over, he stood amidst the carnage in the doorway, his chest heaving. The gold fire in his eyes slowly banked back to storm gray. He turned to look at her, his expression a mask of dread. He was waiting for her horror. He was waiting for her to finally see the monster and scream. Margaret stood up. She ignored the ruin in the doorway. She walked to him. Her eyes scanned the new, bleeding wound on his chest, the graze on his shoulder. Her fingers, steady and sure, probed the edges. "The bullet?" she asked, her voice clinical. "Through and through," he rasped, stunned by her focus. "Good." She met his gaze, her own clear and unafraid. "Now let's finish sealing the house. They're regrouping at the tree line." She turned back to her screens, her posture straight. The message was unmistakable. His violence was not a revelation. It was a tool. And she was the architect who knew how to use it. The silence after the final system alert was deafening. The estate was secure. The invaders were gone, retreated or otherwise neutralized. The heavy scent of blood, cordite, and ozone hung in the air. Silas stood in the center of the room, his chest still heaving from the shift, from the violence. The raw, bleeding wound on his chest was already knitting closed at a visible, impossible rate. But he wasn't looking at his healing flesh. He was watching her. His expression was braced for the recoil he knew must come, the horror, the revulsion at the beast he had fully revealed. Margaret approached him. She did not look at the carnage near the door. Her eyes were only for him, for the injuries. She reached out, her fingers gentle as they traced the line of the claw mark on his shoulder, now just an angry pink seam. Her touch was not a healer's. It was a surveyor's, a possessor's. "You're still bleeding here," she said, her voice quiet, factual. She pressed her palm flat against the bullet wound on his chest, applying pressure. His skin was fever hot under her hand. He shuddered, a full-body tremor. "Margaret, the adrenaline is crashing," she stated, looking up at his face. "Your system is overloading. The shift destabilized you." She had analyzed him, and she had diagnosed the problem. His control was fraying, not from injury, but from the aftermath, from the fear of her rejection. He stared at her, his golden eyes wide with confusion and a desperate, dawning hope. The wolf in him was close, agitated by the pain, by her proximity, by the need for the bond to stabilize. "You need an anchor," she whispered, the words not a question, but a realization. Her other hand came up to cradle the side of his neck, her thumb over his hammering pulse. "You told me I quiet the noise." A broken sound escaped him. He was trembling now, the full weight of his exhaustion and vulnerability crashing down. He was a king brought to his knees, not by an enemy, but by the terrifying gift of her acceptance. He bent his head, his forehead resting against hers. "Please," he begged, the word raw and stripped bare. She understood. She tilted her head, exposing the junction of her neck and shoulder. An offering, a choice. "Then be quiet." He moved with a hunger that was both brutal and reverent. His arms locked around her, crushing her to him. His mouth found the spot, his teeth sharp against her skin. The bite was a bright, searing pain that lasted only a second before it transformed. It was not violence. It was a merger. A flood of warmth, of certainty, of a connection snapping into place with the finality of a cryptographic key turning in a lock. She felt his relief, his awe, his fierce, eternal devotion pour into her veins alongside the biological agents that sealed the bond. The static hum that had always buzzed between them settled into a permanent, comforting frequency in the base of her skull. A new sense. His presence. He released her, licking the mark gently. His eyes were clear gray again, the chaos within him soothed. They were both breathing heavily, foreheads still touching. Mine, he growled, the possession now a shared truth. Yours, she affirmed. Then she added, her voice gaining its old, sharp edge. And you are mine. We are no longer employer and employee. We are the architects. Now let's clean this up. We have a board to address in the morning. 1 month later, Margaret Wood walked into the Obsidian Court boardroom. She wore a tailored black suit, her hair in a severe knot. The faint, silvery scar at the base of her neck was hidden by her collar. Silas Blackwood walked at her side, a half step behind. Not in deference, in formation. The 12 board members, the most powerful humans in the city, fell silent. They did not look at Silas. Their heads bowed, a unified gesture of submission, toward her. Margaret took her seat at the head of the table. She did not smile. She touched the scar beneath her collar, a secret smile touching her lips. He was right. She knew too much to ever leave. But the truth was, she never wanted to. Subscribe to see who the Alpha claims next.